Hey, long time no see. Sorry for being such a stranger, but I made that cross-country move with my wife to grad school, and I think I accidentally hired the same movers as that one YouTuber that had all his stuff disappear during his move. Resolving that is my own personal problem, though. Welcome to a little something I'm calling IndieWeen, a series of videos for the month of October where I'm showcasing a series of indie horror games every Saturday for which you can enjoy all of for less than the price of a single AAA title. The first indie spooky game we're going to be showing off is Storm in a Teacup's Close to the Sun. It's a first-person adventure game that centers around one Rose Archer, who gets a mysterious letter from her sister asking her to please come aboard Nikola Tesla's giant art-deco megaship where all the scientists are doing some pretty wild stuff that might have crossed a few lines, and I think we're approaching an XK class end-of-world scenario unless we stop it right this instant. Yeah, this was that one game a few years back that everyone initially compared to Bioshock based on its look and premise when the teasers came out. It goes a bit deeper than that, but we'll get to that later on in the video. So our inaugural game for IndieWeen will set you back $20 American. But there's a chance you already own this game. Close to the Sun was one of the 200 or so games that the Epic Games Store gave away for free over the summer that we all impulsively redeemed because we like free stuff. Also, while we're at it, please don't waste my or anyone else's time with your wall of text about how EGS is now the super duper evil EA or something whatever, because let's face it, we're over it, and Steam isn't exactly a perfect little angel of a megacorp storefront either. I will concede, however, that it was pretty slick of Epic to make Close to the Sun free on their platform right as the game's one-year exclusivity deal was ending and it was about to launch on Steam. The point I'm trying to make here is, if you like getting free games, there's a good chance Close to the Sun is already in your Epic Game Store library. Now, let's talk about the game. So who are the devs behind this game that everyone was super hyped about for about 11 minutes before we all forgot about it when it came out? Well, Storm in a Teacup self-describes as being founded in Rome, Italy in 2013 by one Carlo Bianchi, who had an extensive career in video effects for both the cinema and the video game. They make a thing in their about page about not being like the other devs, focusing on ethical practices such as avoiding crunch culture, not being a jerk to competitors, and all that good stuff, which is something that while I cannot find any confirming evidence of, aside from the fact that in the credits they show their support of an organization that works to do exactly that, I'd like to believe they're being honest and sincere because I want to see more of that in the games industry. Before Close to the Sun, Storm in a Teacup had several previous releases that were somewhat similar to how Close to the Sun played, including one that was a VR title. All of these flew under the radar, and a quick peek at their store pages shows that they got mixed reviews at best and are all pretty short experiences, having not all that much gameplay. That's fine. Walking sims are allowed to exist, they just need to make sure they tell a compelling story both visually and, I guess, mentally to make up for their lack of action. The focus on visual content over gameplay makes perfect sense too when you consider that Storm in the Teacup's founder Carlo Bianchi's wheelhouse is visual effects. Based on the screenshots in the trailers, all these games look gorgeous. Close to the Sun also marks the second time out of the 4 games they've made that Storm in a Teacup worked with a publisher. For their previous title, they worked with 1C Entertainment, whose many titles include the upcoming Graven, which is definitely getting some screen time on this channel in the future, but for Close to the Sun, they worked with one Wired Productions. While Storm in the Teacup is a fairly small studio, Wired Productions brought in a whole lot of people to help with Close to the Sun, and based on my poor counting skills at the credits, out of the close to 100 people listed in the end titles, only about 20 are part of Storm in a Teacup. The results look great though, so let's actually talk about the game itself now. First and foremost, the gameplay of Close to the Sun is more based on the visual, but there are some puzzles and gamey things that make it more than a walking sim, but less than an adventure game. IGN's David Jagno said that Close to the Sun was a mix of Bioshock in aesthetic and Outlast in gameplay, and I mostly agree. I'd say that the amount of gameplay in Close to the Sun is somewhere between Outlast and Amnesia: The Dark Descent, as there are a lot more puzzles than there are in Outlast, and you spend a lot more time thinking about how to figure out a puzzle than you do, say, rationing resources or scrounging around for more resources, since Close to the Sun doesn't clown around with resource management in the relatively short span of time that the game occupies. But the puzzles in Close to the Sun aren't on the level of, say, Amnesia, probably owing to how Storm in a Teacup doesn't have access to an awesome physics engine like Frictional does. At least for me, Close to the Sun hits that sweet spot of having puzzles be challenging enough to allow you to think about them for a good minute, but not so hard that you have to resort to looking up walkthroughs, which is a bit of a relief if you aren't a fan of mediocre Let's Plays saying that they're game guides like I am, since I checked and there are no proper text and image guides for this game. I'll give you only one example of how these puzzles work in Close to the Sun because I don't want to spoil too much of the gameplay here. Early in the game, you'll be tasked with finding your way into your sister Ada's apartment, which is an ordeal in and of itself. But once you're there, you're only given a cryptic hint about how to get the thing that you need to get a hold of inside of Ada's apartment. When you enter, you'll see a number of interestingly shaped wooden blocks with rudimentary symbols on them, but even though you can pick them up, there's nothing you can really do with them. As you explore the main part of the apartment scanning for clues, you won't see too much out of the ordinary. Mainly that the place is a mess and one of the paintings is poorly hung, but according to protagonist Rose's mutterings, that's perfectly normal for Ada. When you make your way into the bathroom, you'll find a few news clippings of fluff, and finally something that gives you an idea of what to look for. It's a schematic for a secret safe that's concealed by a painting, and then everything clicks. You run back to that poorly hung painting and yup, there's a bunch of cracks in the wall as if someone tried to drill something into it without much experience, and yup, there's a secret safe behind that painting just like in the schematic, and once you reveal the secret safe, there's a couple of spinny dials with shapes and symbols just like the ones you saw lying around in the apartment. Bingo. Match the symbols to the shapes and they reveal a button that gets you to the thing. Charl, you said this was a series about indie horror games. Where are the Spookies? I was getting to that, okay? Close to the Sun is definitely a spooky game at heart, and it does its spookies in 3 ways. Scary atmosphere, oodles of mutilated bodies, and jump scares. There's a lot of that last one, especially so in the first half of the game. There are jump scares wherever they can be put. It's not always stumbling into a room full of dead bodies or having some dude run behind you and make a loud noise or slam on some glass in front of you. But after the first hour or so, your mindset's going to become, okay, how am I gonna get jump scared in this room? Whenever you enter a new room, and the tension in subsequent levels is less to do with the spooky, foreboding atmosphere of this destroyed ship, and more to do with you bracing for the jump scares that may or may not even happen later in the game. And that's a shame, since the game does have a really good atmosphere. There will eventually be monsters and crazy dudes out to kill you, but I consider that to be a sideshow. Speaking of which, I think one of the big reasons why myself, Mr. Jagno from IGN, and many others get Outlast vibes from Close to the Sun is that the few action scenes that are in this game, many of them include you getting chased by a crazy dude or that monster that got spoiled in the trailers, and if they catch you, there's going to be a long, protracted death scene where you get horribly stabbed to death or something, and then you have to do the thing all over again. And of course, just like in Outlast, a lot of the stuff is going to have to be trial and error because, while in some chase scenes you do get a bit of outside help directing you around the Helios, a lot of the time they still can't help you figure out where exactly the sweet spot for that jump prompt is. Where Close to the Sun doesn't measure up in action scenes, it excels in storytelling and world building. The game does a good job of showing, not telling, and every new room you clamber over the corpses in, although sometimes they ruin it by having Rose blurt out some line explaining the obvious that kills the moment. While Rose's lines sometimes do kill the mood, the voice acting in this game is fantastic. For something of its scope, what's even more impressive is that Close to the Sun is fully voiced in 5 different languages. The music is also excellent and sets the mood great between the loud noises that make you jump. The game's entire audio and visual aesthetic is really something here, and unfortunately this video doesn't do it justice between me not playing the music for potential copyright, and also YouTube's compression is at play here. Regardless, this game is gorgeous, it sounds great, and it's worth your time for playing it for the eye and ear candy alone. Alrighty folks, time to take a quick break to do a cooking segment, as is the way we do things here on YouTube.com. But before we get started, we have an anti-sponsor. IndieWeen is brought to you by the Dark World Studios Kickstarter project, Acheron. Acheron is a tabletop game set in a fantasy 1930s world which takes its design cues from Call of Cthulhu, the SCP Foundation, and Dishonored. Check out their Kickstarter page for more on the world of Acheron with its unique races and equal focus on roleplay and combat, and maybe show them some indie love too. So for today's spooky foray into our new kitchen, we're gonna make some sweet breakfast tacos. These are pretty easy to make and only require 5 ingredients if we don't count good old S&P. All you need are some flour tortillas, 1 egg per taco you'd like to make, 1 strip of bacon per taco, and some of your favorite cheese, but only if you wanna, it doesn't really need it. And lastly, a good sized potato. To prep this bad boy breakfast, you're going to want to wash off and dice your potato into 1/2-inch cubes. One medium sized potato will yield enough for 3 or 4 tacos, whereas one of the big boys you get in the 10-pound sack from your favorite warehouse store will easily be enough to make at least 6 tacos. Toss some taters in your favorite oil with some good old S&P before putting them in a non-stick pan on medium to high heat and covering. Add a little bit of water if you want to trade crunch for steamy softness. Make sure to open the lid of the pan the taters are in every 5 minutes or so to agitate them so that more than one side has a nice crispiness to it. Now, place your bacon in another large non-stick pan, uncovered and on medium to maybe a little lowish heat. It's gonna take a while, but eventually we're gonna give our bacon a little flippy once most of that fat has rendered out. We're cooking at a lower than usual heat here because we want to get as much of that fat out as possible in order to make sure that bacon is extra crispy, as well as to reserve the bacon fat for something special later on. Get some paper towels and a cutting board on standby to drain everything. The bacon and taters should come out one right after the other, since the bacon will take 10 to 15 minutes to cook at this pace, and the taters will need maybe 15 to 20 minutes to finish. Best case scenario is right as you're done draining and then chopping your bacon, the taters are good to go. Now that the pans are freed up, crank the heat on the one you are using for the taters and then lower it on the one that you were using for the bacon. You're gonna want to start heating up your tortillas in the pan you used to make the taters, which should take only a few minutes for all of them, since tortillas heat pretty fast and you want them brown. Once you're down to your last couple tortillas, beat the eggs in a bowl and then dump those suckers into the pan that you were using to cook the bacon. There should be enough residual bacon grease in the pan even after draining it to cook the scrambled eggs just fine. Once they're done cooking, kill the heat and then put a little good old S&P on that. In the literal minute it will take for your eggs to cook, you can start assembling your tacos. It goes tortillas, taters, eggs as soon as they are done, cheese if you were feeling it earlier, and then your chopped up bacon on top. Consume immediately. Try making these yourself and then come back to the video and tell me how it went. Okay, so before we get into the finer points of the story, we may as well address the Big Daddy in the room. Close to the Sun is very reminiscent of the Bioshock series in both aesthetic and theme. Let's start with the basic synopsis and setting for both games. Close to the Sun, like Bioshock, is centered around an outsider entering a secluded city in the middle of the ocean where an eccentric titan of industry has sequestered all of the best and brightest minds in the world to have them work on their passion projects unfettered by local regulations. Both cities have the utmost air of secrecy around them, as their founders don't want anyone stealing or interfering with what they're trying to do, but of course outside elements are working their way in. By the time the protagonist arrives in this city, it's clear that something has gone horribly wrong, and the only sane voice you're hearing anywhere is coming from across a radio. Otherwise, anyone that's still alive that you come across is immediately going to try and kill you. Then there's the art deco aesthetic that both games heavily feature. Now, I said it before that just because a game uses the destroyed deco look does not mean that it's a Bioshock game, but there are a few other things at play here. While it makes a bit of sense in Bioshock, as art deco was still growing strong in the mid-1930s when Andrew Ryan decided he was going to build the secret city of Rapture, Close to the Sun takes place at the end of the 19th century, a good 20 to 25 years before art deco was really a thing. The real kicker here is that while other games with an art deco look avoid being directly compared to Bioshock by using a different palette or altering the setting a bit, Close to the Sun goes hard on that gold on hardwood look everywhere and in the middle of the ocean too, which makes it unmistakably Bioshock-esque. This look also is what got everyone talking about how Bioshock like Close to the Sun is in the first place, and that's why we're here now. The two games also share a lot of storytelling elements beyond just the mise-en-set as a means to give exposition, since everyone who's sane isn't in the room with you. This is more about the ideas of having mysterious apparitions appear to give you an idea of what was going on before things got all crazy. This is a very shock-like thing to do. There is also the threat of time travel that may or may not be the use of alternate dimensions, but that's more Bioshock Infinite's territory. Any one of these things might have been just a, oh yeah, it had this thing in it like Bioshock does, akin to how Outlast is being compared to the game as far as its chase scenes go, but when you combine all these things together, it becomes more of a, yeah, the devs here really like the Bioshock series. Alright, so we've talked about everything else, so now it's safe to go over the finer points of the story. Since I'm pretty sure we've already given a synopsis of Close to the Sun story several times in this video already, we're gonna skip that in this part of the video. Everything from here until the timestamp should be considered spoilers, or at the very least something you need to play through the game in order to really know about. So what exactly is Nikola Tesla doing aboard the Helios? Well, everything. The Helios was a science vessel first and a floating city second. Why a massive science vessel? Well, because he was obsessed with Edison's spies stealing all his stuff. Helios was originally big into weapons of mass destruction in the name of deterring war. And then they got into weather manipulation for a bit in order to help with Tesla's energy delivery system, but the weather manipulation got shelved after a promising young scientist, the protagonist's sister, Ada Archer, came aboard and found a way to prove the one-electron theory. There was some other stuff on the side too to make sure everybody got a job, but most of it was centered around the production of energy. And once Ada was able to prove and apply that one-electron theory, all of it got sidelined since, in theory, if you can just leech excess energy off time itself, why bother using traditional means to generate power? According to the game's logic, once you figure out how one-electron theory works, you can use the pattern of the weave to not only travel through time, but also to leech energy from what we thought to be the fabric of time. Too bad that doing so causes the time to quote-unquote bleed, and also summons the off-brand time wraiths, which caused a massacre aboard the Helios. Tesla realizes that things are now pretty screwed and enacts a shipwide quarantine just in case Black Flash decides to show up too. Rose Archer is able to board the Helios on one of its autopilot ferries in spite of all of this. So thanks to the one-electron meddling and the time boogeymen showing up, there's some heavily implied time travel involved, which I gotta say is some of the most tasteful time travel I've seen in a video game. Primarily because it's all entirely implied to have happened somewhere else along the timeline and is never directly shown off. I guess Close to the Sun did one thing better than the Bioshock series in that respect. Throughout the game, you're presented with apparitions that are heavily implied to be flashbacks of the past leaking into the present. At first. After a while, some of these apparitions end up doing things that you yourself were about to do a few minutes from now, and some of them even begin to reflect things that you won't be able to do for a long time. To further complicate things, the crazy stabby guy Ludwig swears that he saw you in places in the past that you couldn't possibly have been in unless you were in two places at one point in time. Just to double down, someone who is never named and is only identified by a mysterious symbol that always appears in the general direction of where you need to go is sending you messages through the Helios' pneumatic parcel system that always appear exactly at the time you pass through a certain point, almost as if they knew where you were going to be before you knew. In spite of all of this, your sister insists that she hasn't cracked time travel yet, but the letter that summoned you to her proves that she eventually will. However, it's a bit odd because she seems to die before she can get around to that. As for plot details, the game starts with Rose coming aboard the Helios and seeing that things are pretty far gone. As she creeps through the derelict ship, she comes into contact with her sister, Ada, and another guy named Aubrey. A quick look at Aubrey's room details that the guy's got an obsession with Daddy Tesla, and also a massive demotion into the engine room when Ada came aboard and did her one-electron thing. All along the way, you see the phrase, "Time is not a river," written in literal blood all over the place and frequently shown in a circle. While Aubrey's a little on the weird side with his new job in the engine room, it's allowing him to bypass the lockdown on your behalf and open pretty much whatever doors you need opened. He helps you get to your sister just as one of the time wraiths decides that her place to exit the timeline is right now, and with nothing else to do, you decide to go and help out Aubrey in the engine room, who, surprise surprise, isn't over his crush on Daddy Tesla and has been using his controls in the engine room to direct the flow of exotic matter created by the application of the one-electron theory to lure the time wraiths into you and kill your sister. He knocks you out and leaves you for dead, but Daddy Tesla comes to your rescue, and you try to help Tesla fix the timeline before that XK-class scenario happens, and inexplicably, Tesla is able to cheat deaths on several occasions while he helps you get off the Helios before it literally explodes. Again, Tesla is still alive despite going down with his ship, and his last message to you is that he now understands Ada's research and now he can help you fix everything, implying that after the events of this game, you go back in time and do things that you couldn't possibly have done during the events of this game. The end. For our part of the story, that is. It's heavily implied that shortly after this moment, Rose and Tesla go back in time and try to manipulate events aboard the Helios to change the outcome of the incident with the exotic matter, with future versions of Rose and Tesla likely being the people leaving symbols and telling our version of Rose where to go, be it through those symbols or the messages that come in the pneumo tubes exactly as you pass by them, and likely causing that poor Ludwig guy to go insane, or at the very least spur him in trying to deal with these time travelers before they cause any more damage to an already damaged timeline. Back to that whole time is not a river thing. It could even be that Rose and Tesla, and possibly Ada in some aspect too, accidentally create a time loop attempting to fix the damage playing with exotic matter did, and those time rifts might only be there based on the damage they caused fixing their initial mistakes. I love this game's story, not for what it explicitly tells us, but for what it lets you imagine and theorize for yourself after a couple playthroughs. So in closing, would I recommend this game? Well, for starters, check your EGS library, it might already be there. If not, you could do a lot worse for $20, and while it only runs between 4 and 6 hours, it's some high quality time based on the aesthetics and the story. One of the reasons I like Close to the Sun so much is that it's exactly as long as it needs to be and doesn't pad the game with unnecessary resource management or collectibles. I mean, the game has some collectibles, but you're not going to be combing every inch of the Helios looking for the 1000th quantum particle so you can craft a gilded leather jumpsuit for Rose that says, "I have no time management skills," in big letters on the back. Up next, we're going to do a standalone source mod classic Cry of Fear, and after that we're gonna get some pixely goodness in our system. Make sure to subscribe and hit that stupid bell that does what a subscription is supposed to do in the first place so that you get the videos as soon as they're live. I'd like to take the time to give a big thank you to my $10 patrons: Elisanera, Tor H, Richard H, Graham R, Spectate, The Shogun, Niles D, Yannick Z, Memesh, Slingding, Jacob M, Deadnigator, Karlski, Chili Moonbuns, OMG Ponies, Bam Bam Toxico, Shredded Paperplate, McFluffers, and French Toast. And a big hello and welcome to all new patrons: Cody K, D.E. Wright, Robert C, Leo C, Will B, Jake C, Miles C, Richard H, Air the Minty, Murder Blade, Andrew S, Tall Tapper, and Tor H. Woo, that was a mouthful, but it's been nearly 2 months since the last video, so I got a bit of catching up to do. You too can help me fight the good fight against crappy sponsors trying to make me shill for terrible mobile games or online services you can get for a better price elsewhere by going to patreon.com/charlatanwonder and support the channel for less than the price of a supermarket garlic bread. But I'm not going to judge you if you need more of that take and bake goodness in your life. Special thanks to the not terrible but actually pretty chill sponsors, Acheron, and remember to stay safe, wash your hands, wear your mask, and enjoy this cat video.
Fluffily poof. Oh, are you gonna do yoga with Daddy? You gonna do some funny stretches? You just gonna sit on my mat? That sounds about right. Mister, I'm using this right now. You can't just, you saw me set this up, getting everything ready, using my makeshift stand because I gotta do this over my phone. Come on, man. I'll just lay down on you. I'm just gonna... Don't worry, folks, I'm not actually putting weight on him. This is my mat. Go on your carrier. Cool. Just like old times.